China is often explained. Chinese people are not. For a long time, I didn't realize this. But looking back now, China, the society where I was born and raised, feels a bit like a giant information black box. People inside adapt in silence. People outside look in through the fog. Very little seems to flow out. And when you actually live inside this system, you rarely notice the gap. Because everything looks normal. It feels natural. This might be why, when people talk about China, they usually talk about technological breakthroughs, geopolitics, economic crisis, or even the risk of war. But very few people talk about how ordinary Chinese people actually live, how they grow up, how they build relationships, how they understand success and failure. It wasn't until I started living in Japan that I truly became aware of this. Hi, I'm a young person in my 20s, born and raised in China, and now living in Japan. Through this channel, I want to share some reflections on China from both an inside and an outside perspective. I think many people who live abroad have probably asked themselves this question at some point. How does others see me? What do I represent? During my years in Japan, many times I wasn't really explaining who I am. I was responding to other people's impressions of China. In a sense, I represent China, not because I choose to, but because I'm a product of this country and its system. Because of that, I naturally start wondering, how does the world actually see China? And how should I understand the environment that shaped me? In the global context, other East Asian countries, like Japan and South Korea, have decades of cultural export behind them. They've built public images that are concrete and detailed. People can imagine their lifestyle, their pressures, their generational conflicts, even their emotions, through films, music, design, and pop culture. By contrast, the image China lives on the world is often micro and abstract. Because of the Great Firewall, media regulation, restrictions on foreign reporting, and censorship of cultural works, the everyday experience inside Chinese society rarely enter global public discussion. Living in Japan for me felt like stepping into a world that was both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. China and Japan are geopolitically close, historically intertwined, and deeply connected in reality. And precisely because of this closeness, misunderstanding, tension, and conflict are also hard to avoid. And this isn't only about Japan. After China began to deeply participate in globalization, especially after reform and opening up, many Chinese people, for the first time, had the chance to leave the country and interact with the world. And the world responded to China in complex way. There was cooperation, but also caution. There was welcome, but also friction. As a new immigrant living abroad, none of this really surprised me. What matters more to me than dissatisfaction is a continuing sense of confusion. What kind of environment did we actually grow up in? What kind of habits and values did it teach us that made misunderstandings and even conflicts more likely when we encounter others? These questions have pushed me to keep trying to understand my past and the present I now live in. No one easily betrays the foundations and values they once relied on. But at the very least, reflection itself can be a beginning. I was born and raised in China. Like young people in many countries, we were taught from a young age to love our country and to feel proud of our culture and history. For a long time, I never questioned these ideas. We went to school, took exams, and worked. Everything felt self-evident. It wasn't until I entered university that I began to realize how full of contradictions the gap was between reality and the world we were taught about. Eventually, these reflections led me to leave China and start living abroad. Not because I believed that changing place would automatically make everything better, but because I could no longer pretend that everything was normal. I could no longer convince myself to keep following the same path. Over time, I've continued to reflect on the internal logic of Chinese society. We're also learning to look at China from the outside. In some ways, my personal experience feels like a compressed version of Chinese recent development. And that is exactly why I create this channel. In the next video, I want to try to answer a question that seems simple, but is actually extremely complex. Why are more and more young people in China choosing not to have children? This question is often reduced to housing price, employment, education. But I want to start from very concrete everyday life, from family, marriage, intimacy, and how risk has been gradually pushed back onto individuals. If you are willing, I hope you will continue listening. Thank you very much.